Hi, welcome to Brainstorm, a podcast about writing, genre fiction, and moral quandaries. I'm fantasy author Clifton Hill, and I'm fresh out of neurons. In episode 7, join me as I ponder how to choose a system of peerage for the world of Kip the Quick. While you can take example from the real world, maybe you don't want a duke, baron, count, viscount, and so on. Maybe you want it a little more simple, like Game of Thrones. That's right, Ole Georgie kept it simple in Westeros. Outside of the Warden title and that of the king, he spent his time on complexity on pretty much everything else. As an aside, you'll once again hear me reference Kip's return and how great the progress was going at 99,000 words. Well, that was 2016, and while it is finally done and in the hands of my copy editor, the book ended up a lot bigger. Now, on with the show.
Today we're going to be talking about of lords and ladies and their absurd titles of peerage. So I'm working on Kip the Quick Book 2, titled Kip's Return, and I need to delve a little bit more into the understanding of my made-up world's peerage system. So we have a couple different kingdoms and countries and whatnot. The two main ones being Farland, which is I'm basing somewhat loosely on French Renaissance, and then there is Renkier, which is loosely. These are just kind of basic inspirations. Basing some elements on Irish, on an Irish kingdom. Maybe a bit more medieval for the Renkier, and maybe a little bit more Renaissance for Farland. So, what am I trying to do here? Well, I'm trying to create a cohesive, easily understandable system of peerage that works within the story. And initially, I jumped onto, Wikipedia and some other resources and looked up kind of the English and French peerage breakdown, going from king, prince, duke, marquis, count, viscount, or viscount, however you pronounce that, and then I think down to earl. The French equivalents, I believe, are duke, marquis, and so on and so on. Baron instead of earl, and vicomte instead of viscount, and etc. So I don't know if I really need this kind of level of breakdown, but it feels like it's necessary. It feels like in a country, in a kingdom, where they have enough, where they've had a long-standing kingdom, where they've had this long-standing class of nobility, they're going to demand kind of having their own prestige, own levels of prestige kind of acknowledged. It seems to make sense to me that people with wealth like to compare others with wealth. I don't know. They don't have much else to do they? So that seems like that would come about. Whenever you look up any, of Earth's societies, it seems like you see this breakdown. But I'm working here on a second world, Earth-inspired type world. It's not historical fiction, so this is a little different. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I'm looking to some other, fiction examples. Let's take Game of Thrones, or the book series The Song of Ice and Fire. and also the other big book series in fantasy that likes to play with game of, in this case, houses instead of thrones. Though I'm sure there's plenty of other books, but these are the two that are kind of prevalent in my mind. And that would be Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. So, in both of them, if we look at Game of Thrones, which is very popular and has the TV series and all that, we see that they give titles of Lord. There are kind of subtitles of note for certain individuals, such as the Warden of the North, given to House Stark, who is a vassal to his liege lord, Robert Baratheon of House Baratheon, who is king. So they've got the 7 different kingdoms within Westeros, and all of them are pay fealty to he who sits on the Iron Throne. So, but we don't have like dukes and earls and barons and counts, etc. We just have lords. They know their standing, and that's really kind of all that's relevant to them. So in looking at this, it does simplify things. It makes things less complicated. Do you really need to know that this lord stands above that lord? You can see them deferring to one another. Do you really need to know who has more land, etc.? Why complicate it unnecessarily? Of course, Earth cultures, we are used to these complications. So there is an argument for it, for having kind of some of that legitimacy. But Game of Thrones, pretty big, and it does not break down beyond just the bare basics. So thinking about that was interesting. Now, moving on to the Wheel of Time series, it's similar. It's been a while since I've read it, but I do not believe they break down into, different levels of category here, which makes sense for the series. You have kind of a large, country divided up by smaller kingdoms, like the Kingdom of Tyr and Camelin, and so on. And so it's not like this massive place, which I don't know if that really makes much of a difference, because I think on scale of size, I think it probably compares to England or France, or maybe even bigger than both. But they don't do it either. They have the Game of Houses. They have multiple houses that all pay fealty to an individual king or queen, of their particular kingdom within the greater country, within the greater landmass, much like Game of Thrones. And again, this is a very popular series, worked well for a lot of people, reduces some of the complication, perhaps it mostly reduces the complication for the author, I don't know. So in me trying to decide, because initially I was pretty set on having some sort of title peerage breakdown, a little bit similar to French, mostly because a lot of the nobility in the books are of Farlish nobility, which gets the French flavoring. So I'm driving right now, and there's a lot of weird traffic stuff going on around me. Very distracting. How dare they interrupt my podcasting? Okay, so we talked about those 2 types of books. Now, what's the appeal of doing a more broken down system? Well, first off, why is there one? Who grants it? If you are born of a duke, then you could inherit the dukedom, that duchy. If you were born of an earl, you would inherit that earldom. But it's not like you can advance levels unless, of course, you married into it. Now, who grants out these things to begin with? Well, that would be the king. So the king, could elevate and de-elevate potentially, if they really wanted to cause an uproar. And so, but how do you differentiate? What really differentiates the lowest level, like say a baron or earl, versus a duke who is potentially a grand duke in I guess France was like one step below a prince. So what differentiates that? And I don't know. I honestly don't know. I should maybe do a little more research on it. I didn't find anything initially. I don't recall ever hearing anything, but my sense is that the differentiation would be just how the title was handed down over time. So it could be that at one time a duke had far more land and prestige and wealth than say an earl. Say some competing house that was of an earl status, but or person that was of an earl surname. Not earl surname. Okay, I'm totally floundering here. So anyway, some family that had an earldom. Okay, so between the two, I'm sure the duke would have been higher than the earl. But over time, what if the duke and his heirs are? What if they lose land? What if they lose battles? What if they lose money? What if they lose prestige? What if they have great follies in the eyes of the king, and the king strips them of certain things and whatnot? Would they still have as much as the earl? Probably not. So it seems likely that an earl with great prestige could petition the king to rise in status, perhaps being granted lands that the king requisitioned from failing nobility that he no longer felt was up to the task. So it seems like there can be some flux in this regard. So these are all interesting things. It gives some more differentiation besides just having a lord lady status, being noble or not noble. So I'm not really sure if that really makes my decision for me or not. I know that in Kip the Quick Book 1, I have to do some research on that, just because I need to see if I have already established these things for the reader, and I need to decide if I want to kind of retcon that and make changes. But it was primarily from the perspective of Kip, and to him they're all Brajoled. Brajoled is my word in Tander, at least, and likely Renkir, though this is something else I need to look into to decide as I'm expanding the scope of the novels as Kip goes further outside of the bounds of Tander and the Sparelands. So he thinks of everyone as just Brajoled, or if they are of a noble Brajoled, status, he thinks of them as that. There's really no further need to contemplate them. So I don't think I've really gone into this, so I think adding this extra detail doesn't impact anything I've already written. I just have to check. All right. So There's an argument for keeping it simple. There's an argument for making it a little more complex. As to what do I do? I need to figure that out. And I guess one thing that I'm also wondering about, I need to look up further too, is what happens if a noble is stripped of all their land? I kind of would expect them to become common born in comparison at that point. It only makes sense. There's a lot of importance tied to land. How can you kind of own, control, have any wealth without land, especially in, old times? It's not like they can set up a Bitcoin account and invest in stock accounts. So, well, I guess there could be some equivalencies to that, right? Haha. All right. I don't know where else I'm going with this, but I think that's kind of examined that for now. Further thoughts, further food for thought, further fodder to consider. In related news, I'll touch on briefly, book cover 3 is basically done. It's looking awesome. I think my personal favorite of all 3 is book 2. You'll have to judge for yourself when you see all 3. Very exciting. Can't wait to share. In the coming, couple months, I'm sure book 2's cover will be released, and hopefully book 2 will follow soon. I'm getting close to the end of draft 1, finally. I believe things will come together a bit faster once I do that. While I am still, despite, 3+ years of publishing, and now how many years of writing, let's see, seriously, that is, 11 years of writing, seriously. Despite where I'm at with that, I have difficulty understanding how long it's going to take me to write something on the first draft. A couple of years ago, I would have also said that I had difficulty with, maybe 3 years ago, I would have said I had difficulty with understanding how long it took me to do revisions as well. But I think I'm getting to the point where at least I can say revisions are a little more understood. I think, though right now my draft is incredibly messy, I think the fundamentals are solid, and it's just working in detail work, such as these, titles of address, that is going to take up a lot of my time. And it's really not going to be as hard as I think, restructuring the whole story, because I messed up on plot structure, character arcs, etc. So looking forward to that. And I think I'll call it there for now. So wherever you are, whoever you are, happy reading and writing.
Thanks for listening, dear reader. Visit www.cliftonh.com, subscribe to my newsletter, and read my books. Reading is awesome.